Hello everyone, in this video I'm going to be going over the exact process I use to make my Launchpad covers, and I use the Lite version of Ableton Live 10. So the first thing, whenever you first open up Ableton, this is what it's going to look like, and you want to click these three horizontal buttons in the top right hand corner, and that's going to bring you to this timeline sort of view. So once you're in this layout, you want to drag the audio file for the song that you want to cover, and for this I'm going to be using Blinded by Zakira. I'll leave the link to the download in the description so that way if anyone wants to follow along you can. And you want to drag your audio file to one of the audio tracks, and it's gonna start you off with two of them. You can keep the second one because we'll be needing it later. So once you have your song in, you want to double click it until it shows up with this menu down here, and you want to click this warp so that way it's no longer yellow. Once you've unwarped it, you need to find out what the actual BPM of the song is. It just requires a simple search. If you're unable to find the BPM, Ableton will do a pretty good job at matching it. If it doesn't match, then you're just gonna have to mess around with the BPM until, as you can hear, the metronome matches up with the beats of the song. So now that that's done, we're going to remove the drums. And you don't have to do this in every cover, but it definitely adds a layer of performance to it. Over here is kind of the drop, and you can hear a kick and a snare. And to remove them, you're going to use this fourth audio track. But first, we need to go into this left menu over here, click on Audio Effects, and then Compressor. And then you want to drag the compressor onto the song track. And it's going to bring up this little thing over here. You want to click this downward facing triangle and click sidechain so that way it lights up yellow, and then audio input from for audio, which is the name of this audio track. And then click underneath these three bars. There are three options down here. You want to click the one that looks like an elbow connector thing, and this will adjust the amount of volume you want to remove from the original track. I'd like to see if there's any good drum samples that I can remove from that song itself. What I look for is as isolated as you can get, because basically all you need is the impact of whatever drum you're trying to use. I think I'm going to use one of these two. I'm just going to highlight part of this snare and then copy it, and then put it into this 4 audio track. Wherever I hear another snare. So I'm gonna put it right here because that's where the other snare is. I'm gonna shorten this a little bit. I'm gonna solo this 4th audio track just to hear what this snare by itself sounds like. And I think that's a pretty good length. You don't want to make it too long, and you don't want to make it, definitely don't make it too short, because if you make it too short, then you won't really get that full like removal. So unsolo it, and now you can mess around with this compressor to see how much of it you want to remove. And then so now I'd solo the song track, and then you can hear that the part where the snare is very low, like you can barely hear it. And that's what we want to do with the kick as well. You don't want to line up the drum samples right with what you hear in the song, because it'll have this sort of click before it, and it's very audible whenever you export the audio file. So always be sure to drag the sample just a little bit further, and I might make this a little shorter. Oh, and another thing that I like to do with the compressor is put the attack time to the lowest possible. I like the sound of this kick. You don't get a lot of background sound with it. So I'm gonna do the same thing, highlight part of the kick, copy, I don't know where it went. You wanna copy it. Oh, I click cut, that's why. Click copy and then bring it to where the first kick is. And again, you wanna put it slightly in front of the actual song. I'm gonna listen to what the sample sounds like by soloing this fourth track. And I can make that a lot shorter. Okay, I think that will be good. And then back to soloing the third track to hear what it sounds like. And that's actually a really good. You can just copy and paste these to line up. See if that's right. What I usually do for my covers is I very rarely cover an entire song because honestly not many people watch through the whole thing, and myself, even I don't watch through entire Launchpad covers because they're just too long and they get a little repetitive. So you want to find the part that is most interesting to you and that you think other people will find the most interesting. That's just my style, so if you want to do the whole song, feel free to. I just don't think it's worth the time and the effort when not that many people are going to watch through the whole thing anyways. I'm going to cut the song here, right where the build-up starts. To cut a part of the song, you just bring this line to the part that you want to cut, and then Control E is on Windows, and then just backspace the selected other part. Here's the second drop. I think I want to keep that in. And this sounds like a very, very good part to stop at because the rest of the song basically repeats after this. Actually, some of the drums are having that clicking sound at the beginning, so I just got to move them up further. You can hear it, especially with this one. So you don't, that removed all the clicking. And I'm going to copy this pattern again for the second part, even though it sounds slightly different, because we should be able to add in what we're missing. Oh, that's way off. So there's a kick right there. I think I'm going to use one of these, but either a short one or a softer one, so that way it's not too strong. Yeah, because right there is barely enough time to recover, and it just sounds really weird. If you want it to not compress as hard, just double click on this sample and then bring the decibel down. You'll see it shrink. Alright, that sounds pretty good. And I'm gonna use this sample for the other quieter kicks that you hear. Alright, that sounds pretty good. So we've listened through the whole thing and all the drums sound good. Now you're going to want to export this file so that way it'll come out as drumless. So you click File, Export Audio, or Control-Shift-R. And then all these settings should be fine as they are, except for rendered track. You want to click the one with the drums removed. So not 4, which is where we put the drums, but 3, which is where the song actually is. And then the render length, it basically does it by itself, so it should line up just fine. And then export. Export it to wherever you want to save the project at, and then you just save it, wait for it to render. Now that you've exported that audio file, you're going to want to make a new audio track, and I believe it's Control T, or you can just right click over here and then insert audio track. And I'm gonna bring this audio track up here, because this is the two MIDIs that we're going to use for the light effects and placing the sounds. Now on this audio track, we're going to drag our audio clip where the drums are removed. And if you solo this track now and listen to it, you shouldn't hear any drums. And you can hear there are no drums like the original. Now we've gotten to the part where we're going to make the project interact with the Launchpad. I like to solo all the tracks that I'm actually going to use, and to solo multiple tracks, you hold Control on Windows and just click on the solos, and now it should solo these three. You also want to click this clock looking thing, and this arms this track to interact with this. So now whenever you press buttons on here, you should see these things lighting up. In this left menu, click on this instrument and then drag this click and drag this instrument rack onto the first MIDI track. Click these three horizontal lines to bring it out like this, and then click chain. Right click this highlighted rectangle and map to macro 1. Click MIDI up here and you should see this turn purple. Click on chain selector so that way you have these four corner things on it, and you're going to select just the first one and just the last one, and you have to hold them down, and then click MIDI again so that way we get out of that. And now whenever you press each one of these buttons, you should see this line move up, and that's how we change pages. If you need more than 8 pages, we set the first part up how we did the 8 pages, map to macro 1. But before we press MIDI, you want to go to user 2. And while you're in user 2, then you want to click MIDI. Click the chain selector, and then depending on how many sets of 8 you need is how many of these you'll press. So if you need 16 pages, you'll tap the first 2. If you need 24 pages, you'll do 3. And if for some reason you need 32 pages, you'll do the first 4. The most I've ever needed to was 16 pages. So I'm just going to select these first 2, and you want to change the max to 1. If you were to do 3 of these, you change the max to 2. So it's the number of pads you press minus 1. We can get out of MIDI. While we're in the user 2 setting, if we click these 2, you should see when I click the first one, it brings it to the first page. If I click the second one, I bring it to the second page. Now, we're going to set up 8 pages for each one of these. So we're going to go back to user 1. We're going to drag an instrument rack into this chain, and then set it up how we did with the original 8. So right click on this, map to macro 1, MIDI chain selector, select these 8, or select these 2, change it to 7, and now you should see this moves up as well. So this is the first set of 8. Now we're going to the second set of 8. User 2 to the second set of 8, and then back to user 1. Create chain, drag this slider out to the second one, drag another instrument rack, and we're going to set up these 8 how we did the last 8. Map to macro 1, MIDI, chain selector, these 8, and 7. And now these 8 should move. For this song though, we'll only need 1 set of 8, so I'm gonna set this up how I showed you guys the first time. And so now we have a working set of 8 pages. To make the samples interact with the Launchpad, create chain, you're going to want to drag a drum rack into this first page. And so now whenever you press buttons, you'll see them light up right here. Once we've set this up, we can start chopping up the song. Actually, it doesn't matter what order you do this. You can chop up the song first and then set up this instrument rack, or you can set up the instrument rack first and then chop up the song. It's up to you. To play samples on here, let's just cut the song in certain parts. I'm going to Control E to cut the song. Once you have these chopped, you want to click back onto your first instrument rack. However you want to lay this out, basically. So I'm just going to do simple, these bottom four. You just drag the sample in here onto the ones that you want it to correspond with. You want to make sure that this snap option is deselected, and I'll show you why. So if we zoom in by dragging down, here you can see that it doesn't actually extend all the way. But when you click this snap and it deselects, then it brings it all the way out. That's just how you do all the rest of them. You just click and drag to whatever spot. If you hold the button where you want to put it, you'll see it highlight it, and then just click and drag all the samples to where you want them to lay out. Same thing for all the different pages. So I'm going to show you what that looks like. I'm going to create another chain. This is for the second page. Drag in a drum rack. So now, the first page, you hear that. If we switch to the second page and I press those same buttons, you don't hear the first ones. For the sake of this example, obviously you'd probably put these on the same page, but this is what it looked like then. So first page, second page. And so you just do that for the rest of the song. You add more pages, you chop up the song, and then you have the whole song completed. To add the drums back in, find these drum samples that we used earlier and just drag them in. Unsnap again, because we're gonna try to get the drum sample as clear as possible. Do the same thing with the snare. So in this case, this snare is a little bit loud. You can hear it whenever I play this part. It's a little too strong. If it's a little too strong, just go over to this volume and then drag it down. I'm gonna try -18 and see what that sounds like. So that actually doesn't sound too bad whenever you play it. So here are the drum samples. And then them without. So now we're going to use the second MIDI track. You want to drag in a MIDI effect rack. So you're gonna go over on this left menu, click MIDI effects, and click and drag this MIDI effect rack onto second MIDI. And setting up pages like this is exactly like how we set up pages for the samples. Right click, map to macro 1, MIDI, click on this, select all 7, 8, no, select these two buttons, change this to 7, and then out of MIDI. Just make sure these work, and right click, create chain. Now, we're going to drag another MIDI effect rack into this first chain, and then click this button again to bring this out, but we're going to click key instead. You can see whenever I press a key, a different key, the piano roll will light up red for whatever key you're pressing. I'm gonna do the simplest light effect that I use quite a lot in my covers, and it's just a velocity. So we're going to change the color of these pads. In order to actually see the lights on the MIDI track that you put the MIDI effect track on, where it says no output, you want to click this drop down arrow and click on your Launchpad that you're using. So in this case, mine is Launchpad MK2. And then this channel thing should pop up, and you want to change it to 6. And only channel 6 will work. So you have to set it to channel 6. Everything else is fine. So now whenever you press, you'll see them light up. And I don't have the best recording lighting right now, but you can see that these are in fact lighting up. If you want to change the color, you just click and drag this velocity into this chain. Clicking on this out high, if you adjust this, now it's a yellow, now it's a green, another green, this is white, and then yeah, you can just go all the way down. Let's say you don't want every key to light up as orange. Then you'd select either the range or the single key that you want to light up. So say I just want this one to light up orange. You'll see that if I hold it down, this red key is highlighted. You just have to double click on that. And that shrinks it down to just this. So now if I press any other button, they don't light up. Only this one does. Let's say I just want this top quadrant to light up. You would select the lowest and the highest, which would be these. Oh, I guess a good time to point out is that in the keys of the Launchpad, they ascend this way. So it's from left to right, just these four, and then it goes up on this side. Then once you get up here, it starts down here, and then it goes left to right again, up here, and then down this. If I were to select the lowest and the highest of this quadrant, it would be these two. Lowest and highest of this quadrant would be these two. These two, and then these two. So I just want this top left-hand quadrant to light up. I double click, and now all of these should light up, but no others will. Now, we want to do chain light effect, so we have moving parts. I'm going to get rid of this velocity. I'm just going to focus on one light effect, and it's going to be triggered by this button. So double click on this, it'll bring it to that. I'm just going to make it a little wave in this, so it's going to go from here, and then like that. Drag an arpeggiator into this chain. And then drag a MIDI effect rack behind the arpeggiator. It's important to note that the light effect priority starts on the left. So whatever happens on the left will essentially carry over to the rest of whatever's behind it. In this MIDI effect rack, click these 3 horizontal lines to bring it like this. And we're going to click key again. Oh no, sorry. We have to set up the arpeggiator first. Click this hold so that way it highlights. And what that means is you can press it and it will trigger by itself. Like you don't have to hold it down. If I deselected that, then you would have to hold it down for the light effect to continue. We only want it to happen once whenever we press this. So where it says repeats, it's set at infinity by default. You want to change it to 1 or however many times you want it to repeat. In our light effect, it's going to start from here, go to these two, go to these three, go to these four, these three, these two, and then this last one. So I'm just going to start by saying maybe it'll take 7 steps, and 8 steps is the maximum. And then distance, we want to change this to 1. In this MIDI effect rack, we're going to create a chain. As soon as we press this, just spam double click so that way it highlights just one. And so this is the first one. Only the first one will light up, but you can see that the rest are still being triggered. Create a new chain. Actually, we can just duplicate the last one. Control D, drag this slider to the next one, and you'll see now just these two light up. But we want this button to light up with this one as well. So in order to do that, we're going to drag a chord in. And what this chord does is it allows you to add on more pads. If I change this first shift to +1, you'll see now these two light up. If I set it to 3, it lights up the one that I want. We can duplicate this chain because we'll be using the same process, except we need one more. So we're going to change this shift up to whatever will light this one up. And it just happens to be 6. And the faster you find patterns, the easier it will be. So you can see that it's +3 to go in this diagonal order. So we're going to duplicate that again. And now, going by the pattern that it's been doing, it should light up these 3. So then we add +9, and that should light up this one. The reason why this has been working is because every time it moves up, the original thing that's being triggered are these bottom 4. And it just so happens that we need these bottom 4 to line up in the order that it's been. Now we've reached the end, and we need this one to light up. So what do? We're going to create a chain and just drag these parts to the next step. And then you're going to want to drag this pitch and bring it down here. If we just play this out, you'll see it should come up to here. We're going to be moving it up 3 steps from here, 1, 2, 3. So you change the pitch to 3. And so now it lights up this one. And then we're going to add a chord onto it because we want multiple lights. So we're going to add another 3 for that diagonal pattern and another 3 for 6. So we're going to duplicate this chain, drag it over, and just see what the light effect is. I like to change this chord to 0 so that way we can see what the bass note is. And so it's up here. Obviously we don't want it there, so we'll add another 3. So it should be 6 now. And it lights up this one. Change the chord to +3 and it should light up that one. Duplicate this one, drag it over, and we can get rid of the chord because we only want this one to light up. And I'm gonna guess that it's +9. This looks really choppy and we don't want it to look like this. We want it to move faster, and we can do this by changing the rate. So if we go from 1/8 to 1/6, that makes it slower. If we change it to 1/16, then it goes a lot faster. So I'm probably going to set it to, this looks good, 1/32. And it still looks super flashy. This is where we can use a note length. So I'm going to drag and drop this note length, and I'm going to put it after the arpeggiator, but before the MIDI effect rack. So what this does is it adds the note length to every one of these chains, but it's after the arpeggiator, because if you set it before the arpeggiator, then it doesn't do anything. You can already see that it's more smooth. So if I set this to 200 milliseconds, it just lights up for longer. If I set this to 2000, then that's equivalent of 2 seconds, and it'll just stay up lit for 2 seconds and then go away. I'm gonna drag and drop this velocity. I don't know, I'm just gonna choose a random color, and now you should see that it's a different color. I'll make a video on chain light effects if there are enough people who actually need it, but for now, this is how you do chain light effects. To record the music aspect of it, I'll go to a part after the song, so let's just go to 53 over here, and you can press F9 to record. Make sure that these are still armed. So you press F9. Oh, let me deselect this metronome. Then whenever you go to page 1, so you can see here, it's literally drawing out the MIDI that I pressed. If you play it back, it'll play back exactly what you played. Once you play the whole cover this way, you go to File, Export Audio, and then just Instrument 1, or whatever track you put your instrument rack where all the samples are. The render start would be 53, so I'd set this to 53, since that's where we started it. And then the render length, depending on how long the song is, you change the render length. In this case, I only did from like 53 to 61. So the render length would really only have to be 8 here. And then you just export it. And then you get the audio file of you playing this part. For the actual video part where you see the performance of the Launchpad, I just have this music stand that I set my phone on top of. And I just use a Samsung Galaxy S8 and literally just put it on this stand. And then there you go. And then usually with lighting, I have one lamp that I put over here and it shines this way. And then I just adjust the camera lighting to make it darker. And then the light effects show up more clear. And yeah, that's basically how I record my covers. Once I have both of those parts, the audio recording and the video recording, I open up a video editor and I just drag in the video and line it up with the audio recording and then export that, and then that's where you get the full video. So hopefully this helped you guys out, and thank you for watching.